Live and getting ready. Hello, peace lovers and peacemakers. I'm Sara Jamshidi. You are listening to Peace Mindedly. There is a chance that you're also watching Peace Mindedly, a podcast show I feature peaceful bridge makers. If you are watching Peace Mindedly on Facebook, I do have a request from you. And this is the only way that we can spread the word of peace, compassion, kindness, and a place of not war, no war basically, and a place of no nuclear disarmament, no nuclear weapons, and that is to share this this post and to this video. So for this hour, we are talking with two distinguished guests. And these people are just rock star in their own field and on what they do. They are accomplished, renowned educators, scholars, and major people in the field they are working. Their field is nuclear disarmament and world security. Rebecca Johnson and Kathleen Sullivan are Nobel Peace Laureates. They received the highest recognition in the field of making peaceful changes by working with International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN. It was in 2017. They both had roles in establishing ICAN. Dr. Rebecca Johnson is Executive Director of Acronym Institute for Disarmament Diplomacy. She is also a founding president of the ICAN. She is the author of numerous academic and analysis on non-proliferation, disarmament, and strategies to ban nuclear weapons. Rebecca's work for Acronym Institute focuses on nuclear disarmament and security within the platform of Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT, and Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. Dr. Kathleen Sullivan is a founding member of the ICAN, as well as Nagasaki Peace Correspondent and Hiroshima Peace Ambassador. Kathleen has spent a lifetime in nuclear disarmament. She has worked nationally and internationally to educate the public about the danger of nuclear weapons. Kathleen decided to focus on a particular demographic group that she thinks can learn fast and can change the planet, and those specific demographic is high school students. Kathleen is the head of Hibakusha Stories, an art-based initiative of Youth Arts New York. Through Hibakusha Stories, Kathleen has brought atomic bomb survivors to New York to talk about their stories. More than 45,000 students have been introduced, talked, and educated by Hibakusha Stories. Here, I'm welcoming Dr. Rebecca Johnson here. Hello. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Sara. Thank you for inviting me.
Very, 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 very good to see you and to be here. And this is Rebecca. Let me see. So Kathleen, we don't have Kathleen's picture for the moment. So I'm just going to see what's happening. Okay, Kathleen, if you hear me, please refresh your page and we will bring you back to the studio. Okay, Rebecca. So until Kathleen comes on the screen, on my screen, she's going to come back very soon. I want us in a brief and a way that all of us can understand. Tell us about what is nuclear disarmament.
Well, nuclear disarmament literally is to take away and get rid of the nuclear weapons that have been built and then have existed since 1945. So we've had 75 years of these abhorrent, appalling weapons, not just of mass destruction, but mass annihilation. And
here is Kathleen. Very quickly, wanted to make sure that everything is working properly here. So, Kathleen, we are talking about what does really nuclear disarmament means, and Rebecca is explaining. Yes, go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you. So, a lot of people get confused, I think, when they hear about arms control, and then they say, well, what's the relationship to nuclear disarmament? And I think arms control is what governments essentially put in place if they want to keep the weapons. So they want to manage them. They maybe will be prepared to do reductions and that can be helpful for stabilizing the situation. But if we talk about nuclear disarmament, we're talking about getting rid. And that is why it's not just about non-proliferation. You mentioned that as being one of the areas I worked on. And yes, you're quite right. But actually, I did that as an understanding that we were only really going to stop the spread of nuclear weapons if we end all reliance and actually end all the nuclear arsenals.
So why do we need to eliminate nuclear weapon, Kathleen? So what is the reason that what does this weapon has that is extremely dangerous?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting us on. And I also want to thank my dear friend, Rebecca, for being here with me too. Rebecca is one of my sheroes. She was at the gates of Greenham Common for many years, where women put their bodies on the line to protect the community from US nuclear weapons that were stationed in Europe. And after more than 15 years or more, Rebecca can speak about this much better than I, those weapons were moved from the Greenham Common. So it shows people power. Nuclear disarmament is why eliminate? Because if nuclear weapons are used by accident or by design, it threatens the existence of complex life forms on the planet. We often talk about nuclear abolition, the abolishing of nuclear weapons, and we take those words, that phrase, from the abolition of slavery. Because although there still exists slavery in the world, the wholesale trade in human beings that happened in the UK and in the US is abhorrent. Nobody could say, I own another human being. It became a moral imperative to abolish slavery. We believe that if people understand what nuclear weapons actually mean, that they literally threaten everything and everyone we love every moment of every day, that people would also find such abhorrence in nuclear weapons. So yes, they must be eliminated because they threaten everything that we hold dear.
So in a sense, what the nuclear weapon does to us, Rebecca, do you know what does it do to us, to the planet?
Yes.
Can you tell us?
You know, while I was teaching, I ended up teaching for 2 years in Japan, and I went to Hiroshima, and the museum really shows exactly what happens when what is compared to now was a very small nuclear weapon, about 13,000 tons of TNT. I mean, it's not small, but that weapon, in the way that it worked, it had an explosion with a fireball, and that just set up a huge blast. So houses were completely demolished, and the flash blinded people. And you really need to hear the Hibakusha themselves talking about what it was like. Setsuko Thurlow, who was 13 years old and at school, when she has talked to me and others about it, in a way it's unimaginable, and another way she makes us see what it was like for a 13-year-old girl to get pulled from the rubble, and then only to see these ghostly figures, and only, with their, their skin hanging from them. And Hiroshima, which was a pretty large city, was completely flattened apart from a few quite large concrete buildings, and they had their roofs blown off. But then there's the next thing that happens, which in 1945 nobody knew about, and that's the radiation that comes with it. And that just contaminates the whole area. And so you can't grow food for a long time, or you can't eat the food you grow. And in many cases, because of this massive mushroom cloud, that it actually causes a rainfall that is black and greasy and full of this radioactivity. But The other thing that began to be researched by scientists in the 1980s and now has been completely updated and was information that we used when we went out to the governments, about 13, 14 years ago and said, look, it's not enough to have the non-proliferation and to have the, nuclear test ban or the reductions and the management. It has to be the abolition. It has to be a treaty that bans and eliminates nuclear weapons. And this is why, because if a tiny fraction of the world's arsenals, which today stands about 13,500, but if you imagine just say, 50 nuclear weapons used, and most weapons now are also quite a lot larger than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. If you use 50 to 100, and the scientists looked at India and Pakistan unleashing against each other because they had fairly recently, in the late 90s, when they had nuclear weapons, they'd actually also fought a war, and they did pull back from the brink. But the scientists said, well, what would have happened if they hadn't? And the cities are much bigger nowadays in a lot of countries than Hiroshima and Nagasaki were. What happens then is if you explode the nuclear weapons and just a handful, 50 to 100 out of the 13,500 on cities, you create not only that blast and flash that blinds people and incinerates the bodies nearest and contaminates the earth all around, but you create a huge amount of dust that goes up into the upper atmosphere, and it starts to circulate, and it actually creates a kind of dark shield around the entire planet at the level of the upper atmosphere. So it totally, it causes darkness, it causes changes. Climate chaos is what it is. But climate chaos for year after year after year means people can't grow food and you get nuclear famine. And a scientist who works very closely with us in ICAN, called Dr. Ira Helfand, calculated that with that scenario of just that handful of nuclear weapons used on cities, so anywhere in the world actually, what you would get is up to 2 billion people. That's over a third, well, it's just under a third of the whole world's population dying of starvation, nuclear famine.
So talking about nuclear famine and dying from starvation, these are facts that we are talking about. But these facts apply to people. And Kathleen, you do have like art and talent to tell those stories, and the whole Hibakusha stories is based on the kind of effect that Rebecca is talking about. Tell us some of those stories that you think is very important for us to understand.
Well, I think that what Rebecca just said is it's hard for us to convey these things because it's true. It's hard to imagine what it would be like to have global famine from global cooling. But those studies have been done, and it's important for us to get that information out, because most people think of nuclear war as an abstraction. That's something that would never happen. It's just, deterrence has kept the peace, and all of this nonsense that we've sort of been sleepwalking towards an apocalypse with. So our goal in Hibakusha Stories is to illuminate the messages that Rebecca was just talking about, the facts that she's laying bare.
I want stories. Kathleen, tell me a story that you think, you keep talking about Sesutko, Thurlow, and other survivors. So what are their stories, what they experienced?
Well, as Rebecca said, Setsuko was a 13-year-old schoolgirl. She was actually at an army training ground on August 6th, and she was part of a special a group of young girls that were taught to decode secret messages. And she always likes to say, think how desperate Japan was that they were enlisting 13-year-old girls as code breakers. And she said that the Army Major Yanai gave them the order to do their best. And they said, yes, sir, we will. And at 8:15, that happened. There was a bluish white flash that illuminated the room that they were in. The next thing she knew, she was floating in the air, and then she lost her consciousness. She was saved by most likely a Japanese soldier, a man, who was pushing her and said, keep pushing, keep moving towards the light to get out from under the collapsed building. And she was one of just 3 girls that managed to do that. When they had managed to escape the rubble, the building was on fire. So they actually left with their classmates screaming and crying for help. I mean, imagine that. And that was just the least of what they experienced in stepping over dead bodies and trying to give some kind of succor to those that were lying dead and dying, the wounded, filling up fields of, what we consider like football-sized fields. And people had no medical care, had no help at all. And this is another thing that ICAN and the work that Rebecca and I have been involved in, which is about talking about the humanitarian effects. For so many years, societies, nuclear armed states have been drunk by the idea of the military doctrine of deterrence. So we have big bombs, we are scary, bad countries, you must be afraid of us, we will beat you into submission. No, what we are focusing on is what nuclear weapons do to human bodies, as Setsuko can attest to herself, and the planet, as Rebecca was just discussing.
Very good. Yeah, so I wanted to learn more about ICAN. I know that Rebecca has been one of the founding people of ICAN. So tell us what happened and why you decided you are going to persuade UN to basically take the initiative seriously.
Well, actually, there were kind of a number of founders, and there were the physicians, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. There was my organization, because I came along with a strategy for getting the nuclear ban treaty. There was Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which had really played a very important part in from the very start of setting up ICAN initially as a project in Australia. And then with the strategy for the ban treaty, I was kind of instrumental in bringing it to Geneva so that it could work directly with the diplomats who work on the disarmament issues. But, Kathleen was very much involved in that. And it's actually to recognize, Kathleen did a lot of work with Peace Boat, which was one of the also the organizations that very early on kind of all came, we came together and we formed a kind of core group, and then we brought other organizations, and now ICAN has sort of 550 something organizations all around the world, and that's how it needs to be. And and it was really with the strategy of the nuclear ban treaty. That was a strategy that said, we're not going to get stuck in your, arguing with you about deterrence, because it's like arguing about religion. It's like arguing about, somebody's faith, how many, angels can dance on the head of a pin. Most of us would say, who cares? Or, this isn't real. But if it's your faith, you can't argue that away. Mm. So we, as Kathleen said, we said, no, let's actually remind people what these weapons actually do to human beings.
What did ICAN accomplish? What did ICAN accomplish?
ICAN mobilized enough governments. Well, first of all, we mobilized enough people. We mobilized people in civil society and organizations that cared about, justice and peace and the climate and, disarmament, all kinds of issues, human rights. And we got them to put the pressure on enough of their governments that it went through a whole process of various kind of meetings inside the UN and outside the UN in various capitals, until finally in 2017, the UN General Assembly convened negotiations on what became the 2017 Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And it's this treaty that so to have that treaty, and that was the treaty that was, of course, negotiated by governments, member states of the UN. And at the end, we were hoping it would be able to be adopted by consensus, because quite a number of the governments that didn't want this at all had worked very hard not to let it happen, and then had boycotted. I mean, it was ridiculous when you think about it, but they held.
What other things you think that ICAN must have accomplished and haven't, in your opinion, Kathleen?
Well, I'd like to give a shout out to our colleagues in Australia, where ICAN was really born. And there, Dimity Hawkins, Felicity Ruby, Tillman Ruff, and others, and Ron McCoy, who came up with the name, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And Ron himself, a doctor, a pediatrician, he gave birth to hundreds of children. So it was from a love for humanity, protection for the earth that we all share, that ICAN really rose up out of. We needed an international campaign to bring this issue back to the fore. And one of the early tenets of ICAN was this idea of horror, hope, and humor. So much of the time we heard about all of the bad things, or too much of the time we sort of hoped and sort of like more platitudinous ideas of like what will happen when. But cementing things together by bringing joy, humor to the fore. So there was a lot of like agitprop, beautiful things that were happening in the beginning around organizing people, getting them very excited about this new campaign. What ICAN has done is, obviously we won the Nobel Peace Prize. So that's a big gong that I think kind of speaks for itself. And our Nobel win was really about the treaty that Rebecca has just been describing. We made an opportunity that, oh, there we go. Thank you, honey.
And they go together. This was such a collective thing by the time, of course, the Nobel Committee likes to give it to, a small group. We made sure that, for example, Setsuko Hibakusha, that we've talked about quite a lot because we love her so much and she is just so passionate. But ICAN had Setsuko be one of the women to accept the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of all of us. And one of the others was Beatrice, who was at that time the head of the staff in Geneva.
How many people were?
Well,
do you remember?
Yes, it was the organization, so we won it collectively, and with that, the Nobel Committee made a certain number of the Nobel medals so that we could use it in going around the country. So, it's in Australia, it's in Japan, it's in Latin America, it's in the United States. And wherever you have ICAN people, particularly in the early stages after we got the treaty, being able to take the Nobel medal sometimes opened doors that hadn't been opened before. And that was important, and that was also why, and Kathleen's absolutely right to remember and recall that, the IPPNW, these physicians, and Dimity and Felicity,
reaching critical will is where the disarmament program of the women.
So can you tell me, Kathleen? Can you tell me about the critical will? What is the critical will?
Reaching Critical Will is the disarmament initiative of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Its current director is a outstanding woman feminist analyst, Ray Atchison, a Canadian woman. And Reaching Critical Will was the thought child of Felicity Ruby. And it was really through that feminist analysis driven work that we were doing at the UN to demystify the disarmament processes that were happening at the United Nations. When I was working with Reaching Critical Will, my focus was on the nuclear issue, but the women at RCW also focus on small arms, killer robots, basically anywhere that you can place humanitarian feminist disarmament movements. And so it was out of discussions in the 2006 time in Reaching Critical Will where a lot of the early thinking around ICAN was born. And I think that's very important to presence because it's a very feminist foundation, a collective foundation. And, that really is the spirit of our movement. We are not one, we are many. And that's why, while it's a bit of an ego boost to say, oh, Kathleen Sullivan, a Nobel Peace Laureate. No, I work for the laureate. The laureate is ICAN, and it belongs to all of us. And I think that that's what makes it so impressive. As Rebecca said, that, all of us can hold that medal, sort of talisman. It does really open doors. And it's also really thrilling to think that through our work, inspiring, advocating for, and really delivering the treaty on the prohibition to abolish nuclear weapons, to prohibit nuclear weapons, which brought us the Nobel Peace Prize, also is something that is shared. And it is something that continues to inspire. And it is something that really brought to the fore the nuclear threat once again. I mean, Rebecca and I and others have been dedicating our lives to this movement. But unfortunately, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, many people felt like, oh, well, we don't have to worry about those ICBM missiles anymore, when that couldn't be farther from the truth. There were more countries that acquired and threatened to use nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons continue to be modernized. Here, I'm talking to you from New York City, and the, abysmal, unethical Orange Cheeto that is the president of the United States recently threatened to begin nuclear testing program again. Nuclear bullying is alive and well, but what they had not figured on was the fact that a group of citizens, academics, medical doctors, and scientists from across the world, writers, actors, musicians, humanity, would rise up in such a way to challenge nuclear armed states, not by continually revisiting this old and dusty military doctrine of deterrence, but by appealing to people's humanity and love of life on Earth.
Very good.
That's what sets us apart, and that's how we've achieved what we have achieved.
Excellent. When I come back, I'm going to ask about why you think that, or perhaps whether or not it's a fair statement to say when we have women on the table, things may look differently. So stay with me. I'm going to come back. For this hour, you are listening to Peace Mindedly, a podcast show featuring peaceful bridge makers. I'm live streaming our conversation on Facebook and on YouTube. All this information is going to be available and posted on goldtune.com. An online news magazine I manage with a group of international foreign correspondents. Later today, the edited audio of the same program is going to be posted. I'm thinking that probably tomorrow is going to be available and ready because I need to work on the edits and to make it ready. But all of them are going to be ready on goldtune.com. For next program, I'm talking with Zainab Salvi, founder of Women for Women International. Zainab is the fierce advocate for women's rights in her home country, Iraq, and around the world. After that, I'm talking with Cheryl Olitsky, co-founder and executive director for Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, Sarah Haider, Assistant Director and Chapter Manager, and Julie Plot Warwick, healthcare professional and laughter yoga teacher who manages the Seattle chapter of Sisterhood of Salam Shalom here in the Washington States with me. So she is the Jewish woman, I am the Muslim woman, and then we are managing the chapter here in the state of Washington. So we're going to talk about the importance of being kind and compassionate in the sisterhood camp of Muslims and Jewish people. For this hour, I'm talking with Rebecca Johnson, Nobel Peace Laureate, researcher, scholar, and activist on nuclear disarmament and global security. Rebecca is executive director for Acronym Institute for Disarmament Diplomacy. Rebecca has vast knowledge and expertise in nuclear technology and treaties such as Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty or CTBT and Non-Proliferation Treaty or NPT. Rebecca collaborated with campaigns in nuclear disarmament to raise awareness of the safety and security risks of Britain's nuclear convoy. She is the author of Unfinished Business, the negotiation of the CTBT and the end of nuclear testing. Kathleen Sullivan collaborated with the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. She has developed the Disarmament Education web portal for the UN's Cyber School Bus website. Kathleen co-wrote a book with Peter Locus titled Action for Disarmament: 10 Things You Can Do. The book translated into Japanese and Korean. She has co-produced 2 documentaries, The Last Atomic Bomb and The Ultimate Wish, Ending the Nuclear Age. She also produced and directed art projects focusing on disarmament. Some of those include The Nuclear Age in 6 Movements and If You Love This Planet. Kathleen graciously allowed me to post If You Love This Planet on Goldtune.com. So if you go to Goldtune.com under the headline Rebecca Johnson and Kathleen Sullivan, Nobel Peace Laureates and Peaceful Activists in Nuclear Disarmament, you'll see that video. So now I am bringing Kathleen Sullivan and Rebecca Johnson, and I want to know before we go to the question I raised about what. So let us go there. Let us go there. What happens, or what kind of different kind of strategies and negotiations we are looking at? All this difficult words just makes me bumble and humble. Sorry about the tongue twist. But what does when we have women on the table, how the negotiation may or may not change? Kathleen.
Oh, I was going to go to Rebecca because she's my feminist shero. I did mention at the start of the program, and it bears repeating, that Rebecca was part of a group of women that literally shut down a nuclear operation on common land in England. And, you know, when you bring women to the table where we have been not invited, you get a different perspective. And I'm not going to be essentialist here because I lived in the UK when Margaret Thatcher was prime minister. And, you know, so there are women who want to play that patriarchal role. But when women come to the table, you find more collaboration, more of a focus on the humanitarian aspects. I mean, I think that our treaty really is a feminist document because, again, it's not focusing on the weapons of war. It's focusing on what those do to human bodies, to the living body of Earth, to future generations. And I think those perspectives have largely been left out in male-dominated spheres. And again, I don't want to be essentialist. I have a feminist-loving partner who is a man. But we have been bifurcated into these different camps. And I think that right now we're really busting out, and that a feminist world view is what's going to help heal the conflicts and what divides us. And, you know, you can see it in the response to COVID-19. Those countries that have women at the helm are, by and large, recovering better than those countries that have had a very domineering sort of male practice. And, you know, this is a very complex thing. I'm struggling because there's not a lot of sound bites, but bringing women to the table and having equal representation is absolutely essential to climbing out of the militarist and environmental protection defying hole that we are currently in when we face the threat of nuclear war and climate chaos. Women must be represented.
Yes, Rebecca, you are a feminist and women advocate and someone who has raised her voice constantly for advocating and supporting women. So what happens when we have women at the table?
As Kathleen said, you get a different perspective, and there's been all kinds of studies, and they've shown that if there's only one woman at the table, then she is often intimidated into a situation of sort of acquiescence. And that was a situation with that tokenism that you got in parliaments, where there'd be a very small number of women, but you know, it's almost the Thatcher profile, that they'd have to become more aggressively masculine in that socialized, weaponized kind of way of doing politics that was acceptable for certainly the centuries of the whole military industrial developments. But the more women that you would have, even though they would come from different perspectives, perhaps in different politics, the more likely it was that you'd get an acknowledgement of the impacts of, say, weapons, or the impacts of any kind of policy on people, on the environment, because we're dependent on the environment. We're dependent on, you know, the food and the water that we get from a clean environment and that we can't get if the environment becomes poisoned. And also in peacemaking negotiations where there'd be conflict, which very often was, again, very gendered, that the majority of conflicts, it's well, practically all conflicts that I can think of, men are wielding the weapons, and women, and often they're lumped in as women and children, are considered the victims of these conflicts and the victims of policies of behavior that they're supposed to abide by. And as you move towards some kind of conflict resolution, you'll never get a sustainable conflict resolution if it's only men around the table, because they will manage that into a form where they will still wield power over women, and very often they think they're wielding power over the family, over the land. And, you know, it's all of those kinds of things that are the problem. You need to have women who, they're, you know, and again, not to be essentialist, but there is a different relationship to life and death, because women have to carry babies for 9 months and then carry on nurturing them really for the rest of their lives. And that gives a future look. What kind of a world are the children going to grow up in? Men, of course, are the fathers of those, but it takes only a few seconds in some cases, but for them to become that biological father. And they don't necessarily. Too many men don't look into the 7th generation. And here again, we have to recognize that there, you know, is a division across the world between cultures that really have taken the long view and have respected the earth and respected you know, what she gives us and what we need to do to live in harmony with her. And I'm thinking of First Nation people and Indigenous people in particular, who lived and lived with their land and you know, loved the ground, and who recognized that it had to be sustainable, not to go into this kind of cancerous growth of the military industrial project that has been so appalling. So
You
we
have
are
been,
in the
I want
world
to,
we are in now. So what we need is women around the peacemaking tables too, so that what is built is going to be sustainable. And again, studies have looked at that and found that the more women around the table in a peace negotiation, the more likely is the outcome to be able to stick, to be able to be sustainable.
Yeah.
how come? Why?
Because they're looking at the long view. They're not about power over. They're not about, being around that table or going into politics in order to wield power. It's in order to do. It's a power to do, and it's a power to do something for, the next generation, and that means also the planet. And, so it's about that equality, that justice, that solving the conflicts, that's sharing of the resources, rather than trying to eliminate people that are also dependent on those resources. And this is why also you'll see so many young women at the forefront of the climate strikes for peace and for climate justice, because they, for whatever reason, and quite a lot of it is social and structural, and it's actually to do with the way in which women have actually been excluded from the power over structures. So when we build the structures ourselves, we build them in circles, or we build them in webs where there are strands. We recognize that out of each fragile individual human being, you can make the most powerful network across a world that can accomplish this. And that's the only thing that I would disagree with Katherine about. I don't work for ICAN. I don't think any of us work for ICAN. We are ICAN.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Yeah.
So, Kathleen, I want to.
Thank you.
I want us very good. I want your take on the same issue that we say when women at the table, you were nodding your head, and there you were just agreeing with Rebecca. So what? So in what are the sense you explained? But I want us to tell. I want you to tell us why, which part, in which comments that Rebecca was making that you think is crucial and you agree with.
Well, Rebecca just gave me a little feminist critique of my language, which is working for. No, working for is power over. That means somebody's my boss. Working with means that we create community together to get the work done. So thank you, Rebecca. I was just trying to find a lazy way of saying that. And I think that, thinking we live in a patriarchal colonialist society,
Even
in
now.
the United States, in the UK, in Iran, men are in positions of power. Not only are they in positions of power, but women's work is not appreciated. Women's work is almost always invisible. In the United States specifically, we have laws against our body. Religious beliefs and principles would say that I don't have the ownership to make decisions about my own body. There's a axiom that says, if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. Not to get into that issue, but it is my body as a woman is in danger in a patriarchal culture. My body as a woman is legislated in a patriarchal culture. So of course my mind isn't going to be thought of on the same level as a man's mind. When we look at education, girls and young women are not encouraged to go into the sciences and into engineering because, that's a man's work. It's hard to believe that in 2020, we are still talking about these essential issues of equality between men and women. Surprising, yes. Also not surprising. I'm talking to you from New York City right now, which has erupted in we are on day 14 of continual protests that are happening in every borough across the city, and that are full of joy, full of anger, full of determination, because Black people in this country are tired of modern day lynching, are tired of the routine discrimination that they meet every time they leave their home or their apartment. You know, it is written on their body through the pigmentation of their skin. And just like it is written on women's bodies because we have vaginas. I mean, it is that simple, and it is that unfair. So I think that the world where women of all ethnicities are equally respected, and people of all ethnicities are equally respected, and people whoever they choose to love are equally respected. This is a feminist worldview, you know, which takes into account all of us, which brings everybody to the table and doesn't look in that top-down, power over, power grabbing, nuclear weapon armed loving militarist viewpoint. You know, and I think we're really at a turning point in many parts of the world. And right now, that turning point is being led and inspired by the movement against police brutality and the movement against racism, and specifically in our country, Black Lives Matter. And, you know, we can continue to be inspired by that, but those are feminist principles. Anti-racism is a feminist principle.
So if you wanted to have, so I'm thinking about Hibakusha, if I'm saying the name, Hibakusha Stories. And I'm thinking, so if we wanted to say, or we want to tell a story from that platform, what the story would have been, you think?
Well, I mean, Rebecca knows very well that Hibakusha, particularly women Hibakusha, after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima.
What is Hibakusha?
Hibakusha is the Japanese word for atomic bomb survivor. So after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because of this mysterious illness of radiation sickness, which really nobody knew what that was about, women and Hibakusha in general, but specifically women, were discriminated against. You know, you would hide the fact that you were from Hiroshima or Nagasaki during that time because women were not, in many senses, eligible for marriage because there was the fear of radiation-induced birth defects. So they really understand the blunt end of discrimination, of prejudice, which is important to distinguish between racism, which is a systemic problem, and prejudice is something that can be happening against a certain group of people in a certain sense of time. I hope that I'm being clear when I'm saying that, but Hibakusha, specifically women, suffered from discrimination. But one story, I will again intone the beautiful spokesperson of our campaign, Setsuko Thurlow, who Rebecca and I know and love very much. You know, the pain that Hibakusha suffered, and when we bring them into the classroom, of course, we were hoping that students would learn about nuclear weapons through a eyewitness point of view, first person living history, and that they would work for nuclear disarmament. But that wasn't all. It was also about human dignity, respecting one another, the importance of conflict resolution instead of war. And I will never forget, after one testimony session in Lower Manhattan, when Setsuko had been sharing in front of a group of students, there was one beautiful young man who stood to one side and was waiting and waiting and waiting to listen, to speak to Setsuko privately. And she also was a social worker by training. Anyway, this young man, and we gave them some space, this young man came to her and just started to bawl. He was crying uncontrollably. And, you know, often students would react with tears when they heard the stories of atomic bomb survivors, specifically thinking about them being the same age. But we let that happen. She comforted him. You know, this exchange took place. They said their goodbyes. Then we all went our separate ways. Well, what Setsuko shared with us was that this young man had lost his mother to murder, and that he felt that nobody would ever be able to understand his pain, that his pain was so deep and so fundamental that he would have to live silently by himself because nobody would ever be able to understand the depth of his pain. And he understood, listening to Setsuko, that she understood his pain. And they had a real human moment. And it wasn't about nuclear disarmament, but it's about a worldview where human beings are valued. And I would identify that feminism offers that worldview, where we take the individual, we care for them, we listen to them, and then we also think about how we can broaden that out to the larger world.
Kathleen, you're talking about a very specific story and human being in a very micro level. Now, Rebecca, I want to know your ideas about the macro level. So if President Trump was here and we were talking about nuclear program, nuclear weapons and treatments of nuclear weapons and the ways in which he deals with this issue in UN and in US, you are in UK, and I want also to know Kathleen's idea. But what you would tell him about your opinion about his treatment of the nuclear disarmament?
I'm afraid I think he treats women. He's already shown the kind of person he is by his violence against women and his pride in his exertion of the power that he wields on against women. And when he sadly became president, he started to treat the whole of the world as if it was inferior to, he sort of projected almost, the United States is him, his Make America Great Again was predicated on kind of almost he identified with that, and unfortunately so did the voters who had voted for him, although we shouldn't forget that actually Hillary Clinton got more votes. It happens to be a structural way that the US is built. But so there's a real problem when you have that system and then you get a man who is already in his own private life treats anyone who is not as rich as him, because that's actually the major thing he has, and he inherited that from his father, and that's often the case with these people. That they then treat everybody else as if they are inferior, as if they can crush them, as if they can bully them, and that's really the kind of way that he's behaved with regard to the whole rest of the United Nations. So these treaties that we've worked so hard, over years with different people, the INF treaty that, Reagan and Gorbachev signed that allowed us to get rid of that new generation of what at that time were nuclear war fighting, intermediate range they were called, INF weapons. And the threat, he suddenly pulls out of the JCPOA, that Iran nuclear deal. And a lot of people thought, well, that's a US Iran deal, so he can pull out. It wasn't a US Iran deal. It was Iran. It was a negotiation between Iran, the other members of the Security Council, and I have some quite serious problems with the way that they have, permanent seats, but this is the world, but also with the European Union and Germany. Mm-hmm. And there were reasons for that, because it was about a sort of balance where Iran would basically stop its nuclear program at a certain point and accept, far more inspections and so on. And it had also to be backed by countries that were prepared to work with Iran on other aspects of energy, on other aspects of technology that were not going to feed into the nuclear side of things, but would actually provide Iran with things that the people of Iran had taken away from them through sanctions. And that includes things like medicines, really basic things to keep vehicles on the road and health and the hospitals properly equipped and all of those. And that was that was sort of the way that it was established, and there was Angela Merkel for Germany played a very important role, and the EU foreign minister at that time, they don't call her that, but it was essentially the head of the foreign affairs and security part of the European Union at the time. So two strong women played a very important role in actually working out that deal. And then along comes petulant Trump.
Oh, God.
And he throws it, he pulls the US out of it. Why? Because his identity is that he can make a better deal than anyone else. And he is racist as well as misogynist. Look at the way he treated Obama when Obama was president. First of all, with the birthers thing. And then he's almost set out to try to undo everything that Obama did in power. Now, I wish Obama had done quite a lot more in power. But the fact is that when you see a system that is like that, you know there is something deeply rotten. It is not just about Trump the man, although there are some really serious mental problems there. It is about a system, a whole system that allows people like Trump the man or the racist police officer that knelt for nearly 9 minutes on the neck of a man saying, "I can't breathe," a man who was already handcuffed, who, was not in any way threatening this officer. And that's why there has been such an upsurge. But, for many of us, these things are really connected. And just briefly on the feminist thing, I just wanted to make a point also. The chair of the negotiations in the UN General Assembly was the ambassador for Costa Rica, which has chosen not to have a standing army in the way that quite a lot of countries. Her name, which was a woman, Elaine White Gomez, she was given a really tough time by some of the delegates, as well as by those outside of the negotiations who just wanted to shut the negotiations down. But she was very tough, and she just kept going. She had other women, some of whom were ambassadors for other delegations like the Irish, and there were a number of others. But also the Undersecretary General of the UN at that time was a Japanese woman. And we could see how there was a different dynamic. Also, in part of the strategy that we chose to put it in a situation where all states were welcome to join the negotiations, but no states were given the power to block. So it was done in the UN General Assembly. The previous disarmament negotiations were structured in a way that gave a veto to certain states viewed as powerful, which at the bottom rung at the bottom line was definitely the US and Russia or Soviet Union. Then, colonial powers like the UK, like France, China, there, you got this cabal of some of the worst military industrial abusers of the earth, let alone their own people, and had built up the power that they had in empire.
Had built up the power in the empire. Very good. So, excellent point. I want to see what Kathleen, Rebecca is British, talking about Trump. So you're American. I want to see what you think about what Kathleen said, what Rebecca said about Trump's treatment of the nuclear disarmament. What do you think? I mean, why? So I want to get your impression. What do you think about that?
Well, I think he's a madman. I mean, he's a maniacal, narcissistic. He has threatened to use nuclear weapons on many occasions. He most recently is threatening to bring back nuclear testing. I mean, it's insane, and he can't be reasoned with. And as Rebecca noted, he began his political career, if you could call it a career, by making racist claims against the former president, President Obama. He also, just before he became nominated for the Republican Party, crassly objectifying women, grabbing their genitals, abusing them at will. He objectifies women, and he objectifies the living body of Earth. He has been instituting an immigration practice which has children separated from their families and stored in cages on the border with Mexico. He just today announced that different ocean sanctuaries to protect fish could be open for fishing. He has gutted every environmental law on the books, most recently the Clean Water and Air Act. It's an unprecedented time, but I think that it's also creating awareness, action, activism that we haven't seen in many decades. And so I hope that we will have a fair election, and I do believe that the power of the people will remove him from office, which I believe that he's occupying in a manner, again, not befitting any president before him, making a profit off of his presidency. I mean, I could go on.
Yes, yes. In Farsi and in Arabic, we say inshallah.
And inshallah, he will leave. Inshallah, he will be gone.
Yes.
Inshallah, his not wearing a mask might create something else. Inshallah,
Inshallah.
And his abuse of Muslim Americans. I mean, I have never in my life witnessed, such a crass, a person of shockingly low intellect and zero empathy.
But we are not going to end with Trump.
No.
End with peace and compassionate and kindness. Yeah,
but you did ask the question.
No worries. I know. I'm with you. Stay with me, Kathleen. For this hour, you are watching To Peace Mindedly, a podcast show featuring peaceful bridge makers. For this hour, I'm talking with Rebecca Johnson and Kathleen Sullivan. Please check Rebecca's work and her website that includes so many important information, facts, and ideas about nuclear disarmament. This is something that we need to care about, because we are talking about stories of what happens to people, to individuals, actual individuals when the nuclear bomb goes off. And then we are talking about those people in power who are implementing those policies that actually enables the bombs to go off. So this is important issue, and we have to take care about, and we have to pay attention to. At least after coronavirus and COVID-19, we are being more serious and taking more giving more attention to some of the things that should not happen around us, and it's happening. That includes George Floyd's death. That includes so many things that and even our own reflections. So I truly believe that we need in our part need to take action of educating ourselves of what's happening if we do not act, and we do not act correctly against the big brothers and big powers. So on that end, Rebecca Johnson provides a wealth of information in acronym acronym.org, and also on xrpeace.org, a website that she posts her articles and writings. So please do check the website. Also, I just want to tell you, this is a beautiful YouTube that Rebecca sent me. It's called Rebels Lockdown Solidarity. It's very soothing and very peaceful. I want you to check out the YouTube. I think you're going to enjoy tremendously. I did. did it, and I listened throughout the whole song, and it was beautiful. Kathleen Sullivan is available anywhere that you want to hear and learn about great stories of survivals and those who are overcoming some of the barriers. Hibakusha Stories.org. Hibakusha, Hibakusha Stories.org is the website that she puts out information and facts. I do encourage you to check her website. And also, Kathleen gracefully allowed me to post if you love this planet, I mean, heartwarming, beautiful animation about what happens to the planet if nuclear weapon goes off. So I do recommend you to watch the video. You can search it on YouTube, or it's available on goltun.com. You can check it out. It's a beautiful video. Kathleen want us to do the following. I ask a call to action, and then she's gonna briefly tell us what she wants us to do. And then after that, we are closing the program by our guests sharing something meaningful about peace and compassion. Okay, Kathleen, in the sheet that you sent me, if I have it here, you wanted us to do some form of action to become part of the great turning, and then to support Black lives, and then to connect with the local government. Can you just briefly tell us what you want us to do in as an action plan?
Well, we are in an extraordinary time in our world, and my teacher and mentor, Joanna Macy, considers this the great turning, a move from industrial growth society to a life-sustaining feminist society. So we can all play our role in different ways. Rebecca and I obviously work on nuclear disarmament issues. Other people might be working on extreme poverty or anti-racism or food security, or they might be organic farmers, or they might be raising their children in a different way. There's all ways that we can be shifting towards a feminist society. And I think that it's a really untold story in the United States that African Americans played a very leading role in the anti-nuclear movement in the 50s and 60s. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself talked about the giant triplets of racism, militarism, and poverty. And he spoke very clearly about nuclear war and how using our public purse to continue to fund militarism definitely takes away from funding human needs. And I would draw everyone's attention to an excellent book, African Americans Against the Bomb, by Dr. Vincent Intondini. Intondi. He's an excellent human being and wrote this very powerful book.
If you could put the name and the author and everything in the comment box, so then people can check it out, would be appreciated.
I will do that. So, how to be intersectional, how to interweave our various concerns so that we can uphold one another in our work for peace and social justice, environmental restoration.
Kathleen, we are short in time. I'm going to go to Rebecca and then to you about sharing something meaningful about peace and about kindness and compassion, thoughts and prayers, statement. Okay, Rebecca.
So in these last few weeks, Black Lives Matter has also really gone right out across Britain because of our history also of colonialism and of running, slaving ships, taking people from Africa to the Caribbean. And I've been part for the last 13, 14 years of Million Women Rise, which is an organization focusing on stopping and preventing violence against women and supporting women in all situations of violence, war, as refugees, and domestic violence. And this group is Black, Asian led within the UK, and they founded this partly because things like the Reclaim the Night was very much still a white dominated march through London. And so Million Women Rise was started by Sabrina Qureshi, this amazing woman, and a whole group of others. And last Wednesday, with the lockdown, we've been meeting by Zoom and just checking in with each other. And last week, from so many different perspectives, my partner and I were hearing from women from the Congo, from Caribbean backgrounds, British citizens of a whole range of backgrounds, many of which from the Indian subcontinent and the Caribbean and other countries, and Africa, were countries that Britain had colonized and mistreated. And they were very, very angry, and they were very passionate, and they were just very clearly saying, white women have now really got to get up and go actively into the streets with us at all levels. And what we've seen more than I'd seen before is that now happening, despite the fact that we're in lockdown. We can still put placards in our windows. And XR Peace, which is the peace wing of the Extinction Rebellion, the climate justice movement that also has really in the last 2 years very much stimulated by Greta Thunberg, one little teenage girl just deciding that she was going to go on strike to get people's attention for the climate. And then a lot of kids came out, and it's really the young people in the lead for this, and that's how it has to be. And so my thoughts really are very much that I, as somebody who's been doing a lot of these and making a lot of these connections for as much of my life as I have been responsible for since, I left school at least, that I just feel that what I want to do is, in whatever way I can, to carry on supporting that. So put a Black Lives Matter support statement onto the XR Peace website, because we're doing a series of leaflets, because we were going to be rebelling in the streets as part of a June rebellion, blocking the traffic, making the pollution that's destroying the climate. But we can't do that because of COVID-19. But we could do it through putting out lots of information. So I do urge you, go to the Million Women Rise website, go to the XR Peace website, go to ICAN website. At the moment, if you go to the Acronym website, you'll find one that's just been hacked and is pretty destroyed. So that's wrecked. It's going to take me time to get that going again. So I can't promise that there's very much on there at all at the moment. But the other three are connectors across the world with issues of peace, justice, climate justice, Black Lives Matter. And we have to say that. It's no good. We've, standing with a placard, I had cars shouting, "What about all lives?" Of course we care about all lives. But this is a situation where some of our countries, through racism and slavery, made profits because Black lives were not treated as though they mattered. Of course they matter. They matter. Everyone's lives matter equally. But it's so important to be saying Black lives matter now, precisely because Black people are the ones dying because of white racism. It's the whites that have to understand that Black lives matter. Black people know this, but they are still, injured and killed. And that is why it's so important to be making these connections and changing the way you know your own social media looks, and having these arguments with white neighbors. So, because why should it always be women who have to talk about violence against women while the men club together and snigger in the corner? At least some of them do, because they are also involved in that violence, or at least in colluding with it. And it has to be somehow the Black women. This is what, you know, my friends were saying, as Black women, we don't want to keep educating white women, even much as we love you. We actually want you educate yourselves and be out there and say what needs to be said, so that we, who are the ones who are oppressed, who are the ones that have been denied for so long, that we can actually stand up and shout from the rooftops and through the trees and through the streets and drag down the statue in Bristol, where I was a student. And we argued about that statue, but Black Lives Matter took the statue of Edward Colston, the slave trader, down and rolled him into the water. And I, for one, am very proud of them. And I think they did it non-violently. Not a person was hurt. That is the kind of thing that white people have to get out and say, actually, they did that for all of us.
Amen. Yes, very well said. Thank you so much. Very well said, Kathleen. So what would you like to share with us about peace, kindness, and compassion?
Well, I think right now all of us are pretty much going through it. I mean, we're in a global pandemic. As Rebecca says, we've been in lockdown, and it's been a very challenging time. We're still not on top of this COVID-19, and unfortunately, in this country, military spending has been prioritized over human needs. And so people are without jobs and struggling really to survive. So I think that I think one of our jobs is to, you know, not only make the links between racism and militarism and poverty, as Dr. King intones us to do, but to also cultivate kindness for ourselves and one another. It's very important to, you know, give each other a lot of latitude right now, a lot of space. And in this, I think of a poem that my mentor, Joanna Macy, translated from the original German by Rainer Maria Rilke, which he says, "Quiet friend who has come so far, feel how the breathing feel how your breathing makes more space around you." He says, if the drink is bitter, turn yourself to wine. And another part of the poem is, in this uncontainable night, be the mystery at the crossroads of your senses, the beauty discovered there. It's about caring. It's about introspection. It's about turning pain and suffering into action and motivation for the joyful struggle, the nonviolent revolution that is upon us, that we are a part of, that certainly nuclear weapons have no place in, and that the love and care for one another, the caring economy, the feminist worldview, it's our time. And I do believe that we are seeing this unfold before us. It's not going to be easy, and it certainly will be affecting different people in different ways. I am a white woman. I have privilege. And but as Rebecca said, you know, it is up to us that have that privilege to be called to the front, to be a part of the change that we must bring, and to be a part of the joyful, nonviolent revolution that we are calling for. And we see that it works. I mean, this will be the third time that I've mentioned Rebecca as my shero at Greenham Common. But that was nonviolent, and it was revolutionary, and it worked. And that's happening right now on the streets of New York, and the streets of London, on the streets of Lewiston, Maine. I mean, all over the world, people are rising up, and I think that we're onto something, and it's beautiful.
Beautiful.
And
Thank you. Yes, Rebecca, go ahead.
Saying, this candle is the symbol is of the earth. And I brought it because we're saying we are all sisters and brothers across the planet. We all live together. We all have to live together with respect and love and building peace. Peace is not a thing. Peace is something that we have to grow every single day. We have to build it every single day. As sisters and brothers across the planet, whatever our background, whatever our language, we can build peace and climate justice, and the earth will survive so much better if we are working together rather than trying to destroy each other.
Yes, again, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yes, thank you so much for being here, being my honored guest. Truly appreciate, and I learned a lot. I learned from the discussion. Thank you so much. And with the audience here, we say goodbye. Take care. Stay with me, Kathleen and Rebecca, but with my audience, bye-bye.